Summary of the Secret Life of Walter Mitty by James Thurber. A huge, hurtling, 8-engined Navy hydroplane is being handled by a naval officer through a horrific storm. Even though his assistant thinks he won't make it, the commander insists on going all the way, and his team members praise his skills. At that moment, Mrs. Mitty shouts at him to slow down, and it turns out that the Marine captain was just a character in a dream he was having while driving his car. Mitty's dream is ending, and Mrs. Mitty suggests that he get checked out by Dr. Renshaw. Walter Mitty takes Mrs. Mitty to the hair shop in Waterbury, Connecticut, and drops her off. She tells him to get overshoes as she gets out of the car. When he says he doesn't need them, she says, "You're not a young man any longer." When his wife asks him why he's not wearing gloves, Mitty puts them on. But he takes them off as soon as she gets out of the car and he's stopped at a red light, out of sight. As the light changes, a police officer yells at him to move faster. Mitty quickly puts on his gloves again and drives off. Mitty dreams of something else when he drives by the hospital. Well-known wealthy Wellington Macmillan has obstruosis of the ductal tract, and the doctors who are operating on him, Dr. Renshaw and 2 visiting specialists, need Mitty's help. Mitty is humble enough to accept the experts' praise, and when a machine breaks down, he saves the day by using a fountain pen to replace a broken piston. Before he can make his first cut, though, the parking lot worker barks at him, telling him that he is driven into the lane for only exiting. Out of it, he tries to fix his mistake, but the helper steps in and parks the car again with insolent skill. As Mitty walks down Main Street, he thinks back to another time when he tried to take off his car's tire chains but got them wrapped around the wheels. Another young, grinning garageman had to come help him. Since then, Mrs. Mitty makes him drive to a shop every time the chains need to be changed. The next time Mitty goes to the garage, he is going to put his right arm in a sling. That way, the garage worker will see that Mitty couldn't have taken the chains off himself and won't laugh at him. After that, Mitty buys the overshoes, but he can't remember what else Mrs. Mitty told him to buy. Mitty dreams that he is on trial for murder after hearing a newsboy yell something about a trial. Once his lawyer says that he couldn't have done it because his arm was in a sling, Mitty says that he could have killed the person with the shot even with his left hand. In the middle of the chaos in the courtroom, the DA strikes the beautiful woman who is in Mitty's arms. He gets punched by Mitty and is called a miserable cur. This makes him remember that he needs to buy dog food. A woman walks by and laughs at Mitty for saying "puppy biscuit" out loud to himself. People laughing at Mitty makes him feel bad, so he goes out of his way to ask for some biscuit for small, young dogs at a smaller store further up the street, even though he is already close to a grocery store. That's why Mitty always gets to the hotel before Mrs. Mitty does, since she doesn't like getting there before him after getting her hair done. As he waits at the hotel, he reads a magazine story that makes him think about whether Germany's Air Force can take over the world. He then imagines himself as Captain Mitty, a British fighter pilot. Mitty's co-pilot is sick and can't fly, so Mitty offers to fly by himself. A young, respectful sergeant tells Mitty how dangerous the task is and tells him not to go. But Mitty, who is drinking several shots of brandy, talks carelessly about the chance of dying, which makes the sergeant admire him. Mrs. Mitty gets to the hotel just as Captain Mitty is leaving the dugout to get on the plane. She scolds her husband for sitting in a hard-to-find spot and not putting on his cover shoes yet. "Does it ever occur to you that I am sometimes thinking?" Mitty asks in a rare moment of self-defense. She says she will check his fever when she gets home. Mrs. Mitty tells her husband to wait while she goes to the shop on the way back to the car. He leans against the wall and imagines that he is in front of a shooting squad. Mitty arrogantly says, "To hell with the handkerchief," and then he faces his made-up death with courage and pride, calling himself Walter Mitty the Undefeated, inscrutable to the last.
About the author. James Thurber was born in the year 1894 in the city of Columbus, Ohio. Thurber moved to New York in 1925 and went to the Ohio State University. In 1927, he became an editor at the New Yorker magazine. He put his own work in the magazine for the first time in 1930 and kept doing so even after he moved to Connecticut in 1936. Thurber became one of the most famous and liked comedians in the United States. He is best known for the short stories and cartoons that he wrote for The New Yorker and later gathered in many books. There was also a play he wrote that was turned into a movie with Henry Fonda. Thurber died in 1961, when he was 65 years old.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.